Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akari. The headlines. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine has now reclaimed 6,000 square kilometers of land from Russia. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi says both Ukraine and Russia are interested in a Zaporizhzhia protection zone. And Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill, urges Russians to pray for President Putin and military commanders at, quote, a difficult time. We begin the program with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's daily address, where he claims that Ukrainian forces have retaken 6,000 square kilometers of Russian-held territory since the start of the month of September. The Ukrainian troops made more gains, according to him, yesterday, pushing all the way to the northeastern border in some places and claiming to have captured many Russian soldiers as part of a lightning advance that forced Moscow to make a retreat. Earlier, the Ukrainian Chief Commander General Valery Zaluzhny said that his troops had retaken more than 3,000 square kilometers. President Zelensky also repeated a call for Russian citizens to be denied tourist visas in European and other countries in his video address. Meanwhile, a Russian installed official, Vitaly Ganchev, says Ukrainian forces outnumbered Russian troops by 8 times during the rapid Ukrainian counteroffensive in the northeastern Kharkiv region. Mr. Ganchev said Ukrainian soldiers captured previously Russian-held settlements in the region north, breaking through to the border with Russia, and about 5,000 civilians had been evacuated. Mr. Ganchev told the state-owned television channel that the situation was becoming more difficult by the hour, adding that the border with Russia's Belgorod region was now closed. Over the weekend, Ukrainian forces overran the key Russian supply hubs of Izum and Kupiansk, where the Kharkiv region's Russian-appointed administration had been based. Russia insisted that it would, however, continue until it achieves its military goals in Ukraine. And deputies from 18 municipal districts in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Kolpino are being quoted by Western media as having called for Russian President Vladimir Putin's resignation. And that's according to a petition with a list of signatures posted on social media. The petition follows Russia's first regional and municipal elections since the start of the war, which brought a sweeping victory for pro-Kremlin candidates. The Council of one Moscow district also demanded Mr. Putin's resignation, saying, quote, your views and your model of government are hopelessly outdated and hinder the development of Russia and its human potential. Last week, the deputies of one of the municipalities of St. Petersburg had called on the State Duma of the Russian Federation to bring charges of treason against President Putin. Several of them now face charges for discrediting the Russian army. And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that it is still early days in Ukraine's counteroffensive against the Russian military, but that the forces of Ukraine had made, quote, significant progress. Mr. Blinken, who was in Mexico for economic talks, was asked for his assessment of recent developments in Ukraine. He said that the conflict was likely to continue for some time as Russia still has very significant forces and arms in the country, which it is still using against civilians and civilian infrastructure.
What they have done has been very methodically planned out. And of course, it's benefited from significant support from the United States and many other countries in terms of making sure that Ukraine has in its hands the equipment it needs to prosecute this counteroffensive.
And U.S. President Joe Biden gave a thumbs-up sign in response to a question about whether Ukraine's counteroffensive could be sustained. Last week, Moscow was quoted as having abandoned its bastion in northeastern Ukraine in a collapse of one of the war's principal front lines after Ukrainian forces made a rapid advance. The swift fall of Izium in Kharkiv was Moscow's worst defeat since its troops were forced back from the capital, Kiev, in March. Ukraine hailed it as a turning point in the 6-month-old war, with thousands of Russian soldiers leaving behind ammunition stockpiles and equipment as they fled. Mr. Biden signaled his support for Ukraine as he headed to Boston where he was due to speak on the goal of ending cancer. Ukraine and Russia, in the meantime, are interested in a UN atomic watchdog's proposal that a protection zone be created around the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. That's according to its Director General, Rafael Grossi. Mr. Grossi told a news conference that both countries are engaging with the International Atomic Energy Agency and asking many questions about the idea, which is aimed at preventing military activities like shelling that has damaged the plant's power lines and jeopardized its security. Russia and Ukraine have blamed each other for shelling at the site of Europe's biggest nuclear power plant that has damaged buildings close to its 6 reactors and risked nuclear incidents, including by cutting power lines essential to cooling fuel in the reactors, even though they are all shut down.
To see it go down the next day. Okay, so thank you very much. So the 6 reactors and each reactor.
A Kharkiv power substation, which Ukraine said was hit by a Russian missile strike over the weekend and caused widespread blackouts, has remained non-operational. Footage shows a crater in the ground and the destroyed building where the master control room was located. Ukrainian officials had accused retreating Russian forces of launching retaliatory attacks on civilian infrastructure, including the one at the thermal power station. Moscow denies its forces deliberately targeted civilians. But Kharkiv Mayor Ihor Terekov described attacks on infrastructure as, quote, cynical revenge for the success of Ukrainian troops at the front, particularly in Kharkiv. He adds that Russian strikes last night against disrupted power and water supply in Kharkiv itself, killing at least 1 person. A Ukrainian demining unit has said it has started clearing a village of explosives left by Russian forces near the border with Russia north of Kharkiv. These images show the unit finding and clearing fragments of explosives that were said to be anti-personnel mines using an improvised wooden stick carrying a cut-out plastic bottle on its tip. The head of the police unit, Yaroslav Kostin, said his crew had cleared anti-personnel mines in a village of Yudi, about 7 kilometers from the Russian border, a claim which has not been independently verified. The demining unit displayed mines, projectiles, and weapons they said they had found their Russian positions in Yudi in the nearby town of Zolochiv. Our soldiers returning from there said it was still unsafe, littered with landmines, grenades, and weapons left behind by fleeing Russian troops, with abandoned farm animals wandering about. The swift Ukrainian gains in Kharkiv have left Moscow facing its most serious setback since being driven back from the outskirts of the capital, Kiev, in the spring. The advance has deprived Russia of vital logistics hubs it had used to supply its forces in eastern Ukraine. And Patriarch of Moscow and all of Russia, Kirill, is urging Russian Orthodox Christians to pray for President Vladimir Putin and the country's military commanders and politicians who, according to him, must take the right decisions at this difficult time. The head of Russia's Orthodox Church spoke to a congregation at Danilov, a monastery in Moscow, after liturgy for the medieval Grand Princes Alexei Nevsky and his son Daniel of Moscow. Both are worshipped as saints by the Russian Orthodox Church. Kirill praised them as leaders who managed to combine political and military power with holiness. A country that has this sort of leadership will never commit military crimes, and that's according to him. The Patriarch has given enthusiastic backing to what the Kremlin calls its special military operation in Ukraine, which the Patriarch views as a bulwark against a West he calls decadent. In March, soon after the military operation was launched, he said that Russia had entered a metaphysical fight in Ukraine's Donbas region where Orthodox Christians did not accept false Western values. Kirill had been expected to attend the 7th Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions in North Sultan this week, and Pope Francis, who is heading for the Kazakh capital today, has said repeatedly that he was willing to talk to him. His stance has caused a rift with the Vatican and unleashed an internal rebellion that has led to the severing of ties by some local Orthodox churches with the Russian Orthodox Church. Let's talk now to Oleksiy Ishak, head of sector at the National Institute for Strategic Studies, who joins us virtually. Good morning to you, Oleksiy Ishak. Thank you for your time.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's begin with this news about this advance. We've been hearing about this for a couple of days. First, of course, there was the planning and then the actual operation itself, which has received enthusiastic welcome on the part of many Ukrainians and many Western leaders. But there are still others who are urging caution, such as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's saying, look, there are still many days ahead, and this is still early days. We mustn't cry victory yet because the Russians are still in the country and they have many troops and many weapons still in Ukraine. What's your view on this?
Certainly, the victory in this war means that the whole territory of Ukraine is deoccupied, and Russia pays reparations for the damage it made to Ukraine. And now we see a big victory in one of three big operative regions of the war, on the northeast and on the south. We still have positioning war, and in the east we still have this positioning war without big advances. But this is a first big victory when Russia was defeated in the very important for Russia region for keep Ukrainian territory. And this defeat is clear, unexpected, and decisive. So it's a big victory and change. Maybe a turning point of this war. It's not victory, but turning point of this war.
I think that those who are saying that the Ukrainians also need to be cautious about this. Kharkiv is just one of several fronts in the war. And even though from all the reports, it does appear as if the Russians were caught on the back foot there, there are many other fronts where the Russians are quite strong. And they have assured their citizens that they intend to continue with this invasion until they achieve victory.
I don't believe that Russia believes in this victory, but clearly Russia don't know what to do and will try to keep the territory it controls now. And this situation is a good lesson for Russia how to fight in the future, if Russia can use this lesson. But certainly Ukraine have to be cautious about situation. The first thing is to provide full restoration of Ukrainian power, Ukrainian institution on deoccupied territory. And the second thing is to survive Russian revenge, to say. And Russian revenge in the situation is hitting Ukrainian electricity grid and power station throughout Ukraine to make blackouts of our electricity system. And of course, we have to be prepared to changes on two other operative directions of this war, on the east and the south. But to be sincere, balance of power in the south is on our side, and balance on the east is equal. So I don't expect that Russia would somehow advance and win this war on other directions.
You did mention it just now, which is the issue of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the issue of power blackouts. The report is that the IAEA is saying that both sides are interested in having a conflict-free zone around that plant. And now there are two reasons. The first, of course, was the nuclear incident that was possible. And because that plant is also responsible for quite a bit of electricity generation in Ukraine. But with what is happening on the war front now, do you think that the discussions about creating that conflict-free zone on the power plant can go on at the same time?
Yes, it's possible because nuclear plants are a very special part of infrastructure, and there are chapters of international humanitarian law that regulates behavior of war parties around nuclear power plants. So it's possible, and now the station is not so important for generation electricity for Ukraine because consumption of electricity in Ukraine decreased sharply after start of war because of stopping a lot of industries. This station is not important for electricity of Ukraine, but what is important that safety system of this station should be connected to electricity grid of Ukraine because it should be connected to electricity. And now the station is in the most safety states in this war. All 6 reactors are cooled and not working, but safety system should be connected to the Ukrainian electricity grid. And this is a big problem that Russia should allow this power plant to be connected to Ukrainian electricity grid and get electricity from other stations. So it's a bit different situation with nuclear plants and electricity grid. Russia now tries to heat electricity grid throughout Ukraine, but situation on Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is somewhat different. And technically, it's possible to demilitarize this station, to remove all forces from there and keep the station in this relatively safe state until control from Ukraine will be restored maybe by peaceful means. But it's possible. Technically, it's possible. It's a matter of Russian political will to create safety zone around the station.
You are joining us virtually today from Dnipro, where you're speaking at the moment. And I want to ask, as we wind this morning's discussion down, I wanted to ask you about what the situation there is. With what we're hearing, I mean, there is the Ukrainian counteroffensive. We've just talked about the issue of blackouts, the Russian counterattacks on critical infrastructure and all of that. How are things holding up? How are you holding up in Dnipro, where you're speaking to us from?
Dnipro is close to battlefields, maybe 100 kilometers to all 300 or couple hundred of kilometers to all 3 operating zones. But situation here is pretty safe, except constant permanent attempts by Russia to hit city infrastructure. And with this advance in Kharkiv region, we survived some intense missile strikes, but without big human losses. The only thing we felt in this situation it was short blockouts of electricity. But the situation is pretty stable, and there is nothing to prevent Ukraine from victory in this war.
Well, we will all continue to hope and pray that at some point, whatever the situation is on the battlefield, the two sides will sit down and discuss peace. Oleksiy Ishak, thank you so very much for your time this morning, joining us virtually from Dnipro in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on the program, France and Romania signed deal to boost Ukrainian grain exports. Please join us again. Thanks for staying. The Kremlin is assuring Russian residents that it will achieve the goals of its special military operation in Ukraine. That was the first reaction from the Kremlin to a lightning Ukrainian counteroffensive last week, in which Kiev says it has recaptured more than 6,000 square miles of territory in the space of just a few days. Asked if President Putin would order a general mobilization in response to Ukraine's counter-offensive, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov referred the question to the defense ministry. So far, President Putin has not resorted to mobilizing Russia's reserves, who number around 2 million men with military service within the past 5 years. Mr. Peskov also said Russia saw no prospects of peace talks with Ukraine or grounds for such talks. He said there were no discussions taking place about the possible demilitarization of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, one of the IAEA's key recommendations from its visit to the plant earlier this month. And Ukrainian forces have detained an unknown number of Russian teachers in the Kharkov region, where they have recently taken several cities during a counteroffensive. Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk says those who taught local children in accordance with the Russian curricular program will now face criminal charges in Ukraine. The Deputy Prime Minister accused the detained teachers of engaging in, quote, illegal activities without elaborating which specific crime they had supposedly committed. Vereshchuk says they could be charged with, quote, violating the laws of war, a criminal charge typically used against war criminals engaged in torture, killing of civilians, and looting. She also warned other Russian citizens that have arrived to what she called temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories that they would certainly face punishment unless they immediately leave the territory. Detained teachers would not be eligible for prisoner swaps with Russia, according to Vereshchuk, arguing that they are not combatants and thus not covered by the Geneva Conventions. Ukrainian teachers who agreed to use Russian curricula would be branded collaborators and face criminal charges as well. And President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine could face a defeat in its military conflict with Russia without continued financial and military help from the United States. The president said, I want to believe that bipartisan support will remain strong and steadfast. For us, that's extremely important. He added that if the West stops sending weapons and money to Kiev, Russia could win this fight. The U.S. has funneled more than $30 billion in military aid to Ukraine, of which $17 billion came between the 2014 era and the escalation of hostilities in February. The most recent batch of ammunition and weapons announced last week was valued at $675 million. Meanwhile, a U.S. lawmaker, Senator Mark Warner, says active support by the U.S. and its NATO allies, as well as intelligence sharing between Washington, London, and Kiev, have been instrumental in helping the Ukrainian troops make, quote, great gains during their counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region. Mr. Warner also hailed what he called the tremendous support from the U.S. and our NATO allies that make sure Kiev gets the military equipment it needs. His words came amidst a massive Ukrainian offensive with the use of weapons supplied by the U.S. and other Western nations. The attack that started in Kharkiv region last week saw the Russian Defense Ministry announcing the withdrawal of its troops from several settlements in northeastern Ukraine, including the city of Izium. Moscow maintains the step was taken to strengthen the Russian forces in the Donetsk region. Last week, the New York Times had reported that Kiev and Washington had intensified their intelligence sharing, with Ukraine revealing its plans for a counteroffensive to the U.S. in a bid to get more assistance. Russia had previously repeatedly warned the U.S. against providing weapons and intelligence to Kiev, arguing that such sanctions might lead the U.S. into becoming a party to the conflict. Let's talk now to the director of the Institute for Nigeria-China Development Studies at the University of Lagos, Professor Olufemi Saibu. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, for giving me the opportunity once again.
The Russian president and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping are supposed to meet in Kazakhstan during the course of a regional summit coming up in the course of this week. What do you think will be on the agenda of that meeting?
Yeah, the meeting is purposely to strengthen their positions and again to form a strong alliance against the Western countries' collaboration with the US in the war in Ukraine. As we all know that recently, the Russian government had shown strong interest in using the Chinese currency as a backup against the US dollars in its dealing in international market as well. So the core issues at stake is how to strengthen the Russian positions and ensure that at least the recent challenges that the China also had with the US regarding Taiwan also do not translate to what is happening between Ukraine and Russia. So they are trying to form alliance and then strengthen their position before to ensure that the two countries, they are able to withstand whatever is coming from the Western world and then the Ukrainian consequence.
But it does look as if that is something that I don't know if one would say is coming a bit late because the Chinese have been on the scene in this conflict from behind for quite a bit. They've been buying a lot of Russian oil, but contrary to some expectations, they hadn't come out in support of Russia in this Ukraine situation. But I'm thinking that the reason why this meeting is coming now is that it is obvious that Western powers have backed Ukraine to the hilt. And Russia is now expecting that those who back it should come forward. Do you think that would form part of the discussion between President Putin and President Xi?
Yes, it should be one of the issues they discuss. You know, before the China was trying to play a double diplomacy, trying not to hurt the US and again not to abandon the allies that they are. But given the new development, I think each party is trying now to come to the public and let the world to know where they belong and who is actually their friend in these global challenges that's facing the world as a whole. So the now that the US and the Western world are actually going for the kill on the part of the Russian, Russia also is now looking for his allies again to come out boldly as well, to be with them in this period of their challenges as well, to support them to be able to withstand this aggression in both sides as well, and to ensure that at least the Russian economy did not suffer too much from these challenges. The issue of the oil they had did before, everybody knew from the beginning that right from time, the Chinas and Russias are very close in that respect, but they are trying to hide it under other diplomacies. But now it's clear that Russia as well have to be firm and be strong and also to support the Russia now so that when again Taiwan case come up as well and after the Ukrainian-Russian war, they can also find a friend in Russia as well.
Yes, because I was going to ask you that what happened in Taiwan in the last few weeks when first the House Speaker, the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi went, and then there was another congressional delegation that went there in spite of warnings from China, also put split hairs between the U.S. and China. So the Chinese, of course, too, as you pointed out, might be looking to find out if it is possible to have a geostrategic relationship. But all along, China had asked for there to be peace negotiations, for there to be a peaceful end to this conflict. But if, as you seem to suggest, it is possible that China comes to Russia's support a bit more openly than previously the case, will it not complicate the situation on the ground in Ukraine? Because China is a completely different ball game to all those who have participated in the conflict, either directly or indirectly, up until now.
Yeah, the case is already complicated, but it can only become one aggravated. That's the problem. For now, and I think until all the parties that were initially be reluctant to let people know where they belong comes out, and then they show who and who they are supporting, it is then that maybe a kind of ceasefire can be developed because all the parties must be identified and all of them must be brought on board to ensure that they have a peace arrangement. So now I feel that the Western world, especially the US, is trying to instigate the China to know exactly where they are, to definitely again to see how they can push them to their limit and let them come up. And as a result of that, the US is trying to bring China into the war so that they can be seen together and then deal with the two together as well. And China as well is trying to showcase to the world that as well, yes, we are not Russia and we are not Ukraine. And if you try what you are trying with Russia with us, our response may be different. But as we know, China is a little bit more careful in its diplomacy because of its economic interest globally as well. China will not want to do anything that will affect their economy, even when they have military alliance with other countries as well. So the China is now a little bit at a crossroad, whether to sacrifice the economic gains against the military alliance they have with Russia. But as it is today, I think the China have to make a statement and let the world know exactly where they belong and who they are supporting in this case. Until that is done, the Ukraine-Russian war may still linger longer than we expect.
Of course, the other group, there are a number of other countries as well which are in this. As you were speaking, I just remembered that India is going to be participating in joint military drills with the Russians in the month of October. Yet the Indians also have some kind of territorial dispute with the Chinese along their long borderline between India and China. Now, the two, that's India and China, have supported Russia by buying a lot of Russian oil all along. And now this military participation is coming up, and then the meeting that I referenced earlier on. It's getting more and more complicated. Is it not a situation where somebody had better step in and try to create a peace condition before all these players come into the battle and create a situation where nobody can untangle the various parts? You remember what happened with DRC not too long ago, where you had all these countries, about 11 of them, fighting at different levels there, and how difficult it was to resolve.
Yeah, really, when politics and economies get interwoven like this, and the cases are treated as they come. For now, the China and then the Indian, they have one economic goal and economic interest now to benefit from the war. And at that point, they have to abandon their internal crisis and again join together to face the common foes they have now. For now, they want to join Russia to be able to at least address their own local challenges as well. So for now, the issue between China and India, we for now we remain in the cooler until at least they are able to take the best advantage of what happens now between the Russia and the Western world. So the crisis between China and India will remain there forever until maybe God knows and they can address that. But notwithstanding, when there is need for them to have strategic alliance and they have common interests, they will still work together to pursue that goal. And that's exactly what's happening with the case of the Russians and Ukraine now. So today, the economic interests of India and economic interests of China align together, and therefore they are trying to see how they can ensure that at least they take the advantage of this. And when they have made do with this again, they can come back with their normal grievance with each other, which definitely again we continue to be. But for now, they will not allow it to affect their common interest because they know what it is for them, and they will likely want to subdue that differences and again have a common front to be able to face the Western world at least, and then be seen as a friend of Russia in this time, and to have the full benefit from the Russian that is actually looking for them for support at this critical time of their life.
Before I let you go, Professor Saibu, I must ask you this, because we've been talking about a mixture of economics and politics. And we've been talking about Western countries, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Indians on the other side. And then Ukraine in the middle, and this counteroffensive which has been launched. So the question at this point is this. If the United Nations, as so many people have been calling, and the United Nations General Assembly is supposed to meet during the course of this month in New York, if the United Nations were to attempt to step in into the conflict to try to resolve it at this point, who do you think it should bring on board to help it in that desire to bring the Russians and the Ukrainians to the negotiating table?
I think the players are getting clearer now, and it's obvious that the Indian and the Chinese as well are becoming key critical players in this conflict as well. But the United Nations need to be very careful. This is not a period you engage in punitive measures when people already at least seeing that maybe there's little the United Nations can do. And I think, again, the United Nations need to, again, be able to confront the West and the US about maybe their aggression towards Russia, which actually is the root cause of the Ukrainian problem. And I think the United Nations need to be a little more affirmative and let each party play according to the agreement they had in the past to ensure that everybody is feel safe, secured, and then they can promote and protect the common interests that keep the world safe. So the Indian, the Chinese as well are already a party to this something. And as well, there are so many other countries that are playing on the ground that I'm very sure the United Nations are aware of, and they should also bring everybody on board and ensure that this is not a time to pass blame to anybody, but to find a common ground to ensure the lives and the integrity of Ukraine is protected. And again, the fear of Russia, and again, is also taken care of in this agreement.
That would be the day. We hope that day comes sooner than we all expect. Professor Olufemi Saibu, Director, Institute for Nigeria-China Development Studies at the University of Lagos. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.
French President Emmanuel Macron hosted his Greek counterpart, Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, in Paris yesterday. Ahead of that meeting, he had said they would speak about the situation in Ukraine as well as energy. European gas prices have surged, stocks have slid, and the euro sank after Russia halted gas flows via a major pipeline, sending another shockwave through economies in the region still struggling to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. European Union governments are pushing through multi-billion euro packages to prevent utilities buckling under a liquidity squeeze and to protect households from soaring energy prices. Prices could rise further after Russia's state-controlled Gazprom said it would stop pumping gas via a Nord Stream 1 pipeline. Europe has accused Russia of weaponizing energy supplies in retaliation for Western sanctions imposed on Moscow over its invasion of Ukraine. Russia blames those sanctions for causing the gas supply problems, which were down to a pipeline fault. Well, here in Africa, South Africa has again urged Russia to seek a negotiated settlement for the terrible and inhumane conflict in Ukraine that is causing terrible harm. International Relations and Cooperation Minister Naledi Pandor said in a media briefing that she would convey this message to her Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in a phone call later on in the day. Ms. Pandor added that at the highest level starts to the annual UN General Assembly meetings, which President Cyril Ramaphosa would attend next week, South Africa would insist that there needs to be greater efforts at finding a resolution to the conflict, and that the only way to do so would be through a negotiated settlement.
A process of diplomacy to be initiated between the two parties, and we believe the UN must lead. The UN Secretary General in particular. We also indicated that we were pleased that the negotiations on the transport of grain had proceeded well, and grain has begun to be transported. But in the context of the General Assembly, we will insist that there needs to be greater effort at finding a resolution on this terrible conflict, and that the only way to do so will really be through a negotiated settlement, and that all of us, as members of the UN, in particular the Security Council, need to play a role in ending this inhumane conflict that is causing terrible harm.
France's transport minister signed an agreement with his Romanian counterpart to help increase Ukrainian grain exports to developing countries, including to the Mediterranean. Ukraine's grain exports have slumped since the start of the war because its Black Sea ports, a key route for shipments, were closed off, driving up global food prices and prompting fears of shortages in Africa and the Middle East. Romania, the EU's second largest exporter of wheat to non-EU countries, including Egypt, after France, and the largest in maize, has been one of the alternative routes used to export Ukrainian grain. The deal covers exports by land, sea, and river, according to French Transport Minister Clement Beaune. According to the draft agreement, Paris would cooperate in developing a project aimed at increasing efficiency at the port of Galați, equipping border points in northern Romania, maximizing the use of grain containers stationed in the ponds of Constanta, as well as increasing the capacity there and in the Sulina Canal. It will also help to build a medium-term strategy on the axis of the corridor between Romania and Ukraine and provide pilings to optimize ship traffic. France will also provide funding for the initial technical expertise and work with Bucharest to identify financing for the future. Still to come on the program, Ukraine's wineries toll under Russian rockets. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. At this time, we're joined by Ini John McQuava, Business Desk. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
India. I was just talking about India with my last guest, and India is becoming more and more a bigger player in this situation than previously thought. India's decision to curb rice exports is expected to lift world prices.
Yes.
So now, apart from wheat, we're going to have issues with rice.
And guess what? It affects all of them because already this morning, the price of corn is gone up. The price of soybean is gone up because, you know, these grains are kind of related. They serve as alternative to each other. So if you can't get this, maybe you move to
the pressure
this.
then moves on to that.
Exactly, and so, yeah. And India supplies 40% of rice. There's globally 40%. And what they're saying is, you remember some time ago we talked about the issue of crop protectionism, you know, where countries are trying to protect themselves. That's what India is trying to do here.
Yeah, that we have to put the Nigerians belly-full before we give other people anything. That's essentially.
You can't give what you don't have.
That's right. That
was a nice one.
That essentially is it.
Exactly. So I mean, we may have to brace up, and the impact of the grain being sent out of Ukraine at this time may not be able to meet up
counter
with
this.
Exactly.
And that would bring in the anchor borrowers program of the CBN here, which was partly invested in rice and creating alternative platforms for rice. This is now when we will know whether that
you know, mentioning Anchor Borrowers program and talking about Nigeria actually, you know, paints a different picture because if a country like India can, I mean, it's a known fact that they supply 40% of global rice, you know, and we have the land, we have arable land, we have the weather.
And we have the rice varieties.
We have the rice varieties, you know what I'm saying? Especially the local ones, you know, and we've seen CBN over the years, you know, investing or putting money in this Anchor Borrowers program. But we're still importing rice. Why?
Which is where I was going.
Why?
This would be the time. Because if we are now having to compete with others who may have more resources than us to buy, this is where, what do we have at home? The issue of self-sufficiency and all of that will come.
And guess what? We're getting to the ember months now, where one of the major staple food is rice. And if India is closing up because they want to provide for domestic demands, and, you know, you have other countries like Thailand and Myanmar and all of that, they will also want to protect their own.
I mean, if once one country starts, it becomes a domino.
Exactly, yes.
Now, Ukraine, incidentally, will look into whether it can urgently supply its neighbors with 100,000 tons of thermal coal.
Yeah.
Now, that is energy now. And the result of the conflict in Ukraine has created high energy prices, which Poland, apart from taking refugees, is also suffering from now. So, but what's this about, actually?
Okay, so Poland majorly depends on coal for energy, for electricity. And with the demand and the high cost and all of that, Ukraine is promising to step in. Ukraine is also working on some other alternative to providing electricity. And, you know, Poland actually, as you noted, they played a major role in absorbing a lot of the refugees that left Ukraine.
They are still taking in refugees even as we speak.
So you can imagine the demand that has placed on their infrastructure. And Ukraine is promising to step in, you know, to give them coal and to also work on there are some infrastructure that Ukraine has that could provide alternative electricity, but it's been abandoned for a couple of years. They're promising that by December it will be up and they'll be able to give them energy. But, you know, the other side of the story is when you have more countries adopting the coal, you know,
Yeah,
that's the dirtiest.
The dirty fuel.
The
I was
dirtiest of
waiting for
fossil
that to
fuel.
come up.
The
I was waiting for
dirtiest
that
of
to come
fossil
up.
fuel. So what conversations will be going on? I remember when I spoke to Juliana also about the energy, they also have coal and all that, you know. And then
And they are signed up to the Paris climate change
and a lot of
agreements.
people are talking about what the new king will do with climate change. But when countries are tied up and then you see recession staring you in the face because of energy costs, I guess at some point countries will be forced to look the other way when it comes to environment. But even though it also has its own consequences, we are talking of flood. We're talking of some countries, their crops, like in Turkey, you know, they're having problem with farming because of the environmental consequences of climate change.
In a perverse reaction, though, the stock markets are getting a lift from all this.
Yeah.
And that's why, I don't know, again, what's that about?
The stories that go around this Russia invasion, they just, like, you can't predict it, they go up and down. Who would have thought that because Ukraine is gaining some grounds in the war, that the stock market will be lifted based on that, even in Wall Street? Remember, we're talking about President Zelensky last week, how he came up to speak to Wall Street and asked them to come and invest in Ukraine. So everything is just so connected. So because Ukraine is gaining some grounds now, in Europe yesterday we saw that the markets were lifted. In the US, we saw NASDAQ and all of that were lifted because the market or investors are hoping that with Ukraine gaining more grounds, the war is coming to an end. I don't know. You are the one who talks on this every day. I don't know.
I don't know if that is true, but I guess the sentiment is rubbing off on the stock market.
Yes, it is.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Ini. Ini will have more of this along with her team right after this on Business Morning. The show follows this show. And then later on Business Incorporated, Juliana will be joining them on that, on that show to bring us up to speed from what's happening in the world capitals. Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
A quick look at the sports. The International Boxing Association President Umar Kremlev has met with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the opening of the International Boxing Center in Moscow, 2 weeks before he seeks election again at the IBA Extraordinary Congress. Mr. Kremlev met with Mr. Putin and Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin to open the facility in Luzhniki. This facility holds 2 rings and 2,000 people and is also equipped with a training hall with a mirrored ceiling, a medical rehabilitation center, a swimming pool, a gym, a sports hall, and a conference hall. The meeting of Mr. Kremlev and Mr. Putin comes at a crucial time for the IBA, with an election scheduled to take place between the incumbent leader and Dutch Boxing Federation President Boris van der Wust on September the 25th. And Ukrainian boxer Vasily Lomachenko is ready for action on October 29 when he faces Jermaine Ortiz at the Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden in New York. It'll be the first time Lomachenko has boxed since December. Earlier this year, he shelved plans to fight for all of the lightweight world titles when he returns to Ukraine following the Russian invasion. Now he can resume his mission to become a lightweight world champion once again. If he beats Ortiz next month, his promoter Bob Arum has assured him he will fight the winner of Devin Haney's undisputed title clash with George Kambosos. A former 3-weight world champion, Lomachenko had lost his lightweight titles when Teofimo Lopez upset him in 2020. And finally, on the program, Ukrainians are determined to keep producing wine in spite of its extraordinary adversities. 6 months after a rocket landed in his vineyard in southern Ukraine in the first week of Russia's invasion, Georgy Molchanov is now harvesting his grapes and wondering what to name this year's unforgettable wartime vintage. Like other craft winemakers, as well as larger enterprises across Ukraine, Molchanov is determined to keep producing wine in spite of adversity. An hour's drive to the southwest, the much larger Koblevo winery had Russian paratroopers landing in its fields. The company began labeling some of the wines "We are from Ukraine" and sent a portion of sales to the army. Kablevo sits in the heart of one of Ukraine's key winemaking regions, where it processes 10,000 tons of grapes per season, accounting for about 15% of the wine produced in the country. At Kablevo, which exports to 14 countries, winemaker Tetiana Matvieva says she pours her love for her country into the wine that she makes. That's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladia Kiribulwale. There's an update within the world today at 5. Do watch out for that. The show is back tomorrow. Do have yourselves a pleasant day ahead. Good morning.